There's a certain kind of person who, when their car dies on the side of the road, doesn't reach for the phone first. They pop the hood. They stand there in the heat or the cold, staring down at the engine. And you can actually watch something shift in their face. It isn't panic. It isn't frustration. It's something quieter than that. Something that, if you look closely, almost looks like relief. That moment is worth slowing down on, because the car was never really the point. The car was never the point at all. When you learn to work on something as complicated and unforgiving as a car, something happens to the way you think. It doesn't happen in a classroom. It almost never happens from a book. It happens in a driveway, underneath a vehicle, with grease on your forearms and a problem that flat out refuses to cooperate. And that setting does something very specific to your brain. It builds a kind of confidence you can't fake and can't borrow from anyone else. Most people move through life handing their problems to someone else. Something breaks, they find a person to fix it. Something stops making sense, they find a person to explain it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the people who work on cars made a different choice at some point, whether they noticed it or not. They decided the machine was knowable, that if they stayed with it long enough, it would eventually show them what was wrong. And that decision, which looked like it was about spark plugs and timing belts, was really a decision about how reality itself works. That's where the psychology starts. Your brain handles a mechanical problem differently than almost anything else you do. When you're tracking down an engine fault, you're not just collecting facts. You're building a picture in your head of a system you can't even see. You're holding a dozen things in your mind at once: the sound, the smell, the way it's behaving, what it did yesterday, and you're checking all of it against everything your hands have ever taught you. Scientists call this embodied cognition. Your hands and your brain working as one thing. The knowledge doesn't live in words. It lives in muscle, in pattern, in that particular silence when a bolt finally seats and stops turning. And here's the strange part. People who have this skill often can't explain it. Ask them how they knew the alternator was dying, and they'll go quiet for a second. They might say, "It just felt wrong." They're not dodging the question. They're being honest with you. The knowing lives underneath language. This builds a trait that, from the outside, looks a lot like stubbornness. People who fix their own cars tend to trust what they perceive over what they're told. They've been in the room when the expert was wrong. They've held a manual that didn't account for the way this exact car had worn down over the years. They've felt something in their own hands that no diagnostic machine would confirm. And over enough time, that pulls them toward trusting direct experience. They get quietly skeptical of people who speak with total confidence about things they've never actually touched. That's not arrogance. It's a way of knowing the world that got forged in the very specific frustration of a problem that only gave up after patient, first-hand attention. There's something about the relationship between this kind of work and time, too. You can't rush an engine the way you rush most modern things. There are steps that have to come in order. There are torque settings that exist for real physical reasons, not because someone in an office decided so. Cut a corner, and the problem comes back, usually worse than before. And that teaches you something that's getting rare. That some things move on their own timeline, and that timeline is not up for negotiation. People who absorb that lesson carry it everywhere, into their relationships, into their work, into the way they think. They get unusually patient with slow things, and unusually suspicious of anything that promises a fast and easy way out. Now think about the feeling underneath all of it. So many people who work on cars learned it next to somebody else. A parent in the garage on a Saturday afternoon, an uncle who said almost nothing and just handed over a wrench and waited. A neighbor who showed instead of explained. These weren't lessons, really. There was no plan. What was actually being passed down wasn't just how to fix things, it was a relationship with difficulty. A way of staying with a problem instead of walking away from it. The car was just the medium. The real thing being handed over was harder to put into words. That's why this kind of knowledge so often turns into identity. When you learn a skill through a person, it carries a weight that a skill from a tutorial never will. The wrench means something. The exact make and model of that first car gets remembered with a detail that's almost biographical. Not because of the car, because of what was happening in that garage, between those two people, in that specific stretch of life when you were still figuring out how the world worked. And this is where people misread the ones who have this skill. They see the confidence and assume it's about cars. They see the self-sufficiency and assume it means not wanting help. They see the quiet competence and mistake it for not caring. But underneath, something else is usually running. People who learned early that problems give way to patience, that machines answer back when you pay close attention, that mastery is open to anyone willing to stay with the hard thing long enough, those people built something psychologists call an internal locus of control. The deep belief that how things turn out comes mostly from your own effort and understanding, not from luck and not from other people's decisions. And that belief changes everything. It changes how you walk into a job. It changes how you take a setback. It changes how much uncertainty you can sit with, and how long you'll go before you ask anyone for help. It's not that these people don't need others, it's that they carry a deeply wired faith in their own ability to figure it out. And nobody handed them that faith. They built it, one piece at a time, standing in front of a machine that didn't work, and then, after enough effort, did. There's one more layer worth sitting with. Working on a car is one of the last places left where you can be completely, provably right. In most of modern life, success is blurry. Did the meeting go well? Hard to say. Is the project any good? Depends who you ask. But an engine that wasn't running and now is running, that's not a matter of opinion. The answer is absolute. There's no spin on it. For people who spend most of their days in worlds of vague judgment and uncertain outcomes, the garage becomes something almost radical. A place where reality gives you a straight answer. That's why this kind of work so often becomes a way of steadying yourself. When the rest of life feels out of your hands, when systems fail you, when people get complicated, when the future goes foggy, the engine offers a problem with edges and a solution you can actually reach. The person who disappears into the garage on a hard Sunday isn't running from their life. They're repairing something. They're rebuilding, in miniature, that feeling of being capable and clear that the rest of the week may have quietly worn away. What looks like a hobby is really a way of coping. What looks like a mechanical skill is really a psychological one. And what looks like someone who just knows about cars is really someone who learned, in the most physical and permanent way there is, that the world gives way to patient attention. So the question worth holding isn't whether you know how to fix an engine. The question is this: what broken thing in your own life have you been standing in front of, hood up, waiting for someone else to come along and tell you what to do, when the answer was always going to ask for your own hand?